Greetings, everyone. My name's Keith.
And I'm Andy, and welcome to Brockton Bay.
Welcome to another episode of the Brockton Bay Chronicles, reviewing Worm by Wildbow, the podcast where my longtime friend Andy and I discuss the mundane goings-on in the sleepy seaside town of Brockton Bay. Andy, what are we reviewing today?
We'll be reviewing Arc 4, Shell. And as far as new business, I don't think we have any new business. How about you, Keith?
Nothing on my plate, so I think we can skip that and move on to our point by point. What do you say to that?
I say we get going.
All right, sounds good. So, Arc 4, Chapter 1, we find Taylor back at school in her math class, and Emma is trying to get under her skin, and Taylor just seems to roll with it pretty easily this time.
I agree. I think Taylor's feeling a little more confident with how the heist went, and that's letting her feel like she's not as powerless. She was somewhat conflicted by what she had to do during the heist, but overall she's feeling much better about things, and that's allowing her to push back, even though she knows there'll be some consequences.
Yeah, facing off against the wards and running with a group of young supervillains tends to boost your confidence and makes people like Emma seem just a little bit smaller.
Totally agree with that. Yep.
So despite her best efforts to belittle Taylor, Emma completely fails at that. And Taylor heads out of school, catches a bus down to the docks to meet with the rest of the Undersiders, and the team decides to do a little bit of shopping.
Yeah, and they go to a really neat area called the Lord Street Market, or unofficially just the market. I kind of pictured a bazaar type environment, or almost like a swap meet, but lots of stalls and people with all sorts of things that were on discount or were maybe harder to find or not appropriate for the boardwalk area. It sounds like a really interesting place. They all kind of are looking at different things. Taylor mentions that Rachel's not there, but figures maybe she's just not, it's not safe for her to be in public. She might be recognized since she doesn't wear a costume. And the rest of the team confirms that, and confirms one of Taylor's suspicions that Rachel is in fact a multiple murderer in the eyes of the law.
Yeah, and Brian says her being a murderer or having killed someone is, quote, inconvenient. So even if she had the type of personality that you would want to hang around with, she doesn't disguise herself at all. Having her out in public would really be kind of hard for the team to deal with once she got recognized.
Right. And they also mentioned that Rachel's very triggered by mistreatment of pets, especially dogs. And so
Correct.
Seeing anybody, as they mentioned one scene with a person carrying a little tiny dog in an outfit, and the dog appears very unhappy with the situation, they mentioned that Rachel would have just gone off on that, and that would have been an end to their fun day. So
yeah, very quickly. And we shouldn't just pass by this fact. So in her previous contact with Armsmaster, he mentioned that 2 of the people in the Undersiders were murderers. So now we have confirmation that Rachel is one, and Taylor begins to speculate as to who might be the second one.
Exactly. And I have a feeling that's going to be kind of a running mystery that she's going to have to try to unravel as we go forward.
Yeah, because there's no way her interactions with the group cannot be tainted by that. No matter how much she tries to segregate that in her mind's eye, anytime, and we see a little bit of that in this chapter, and she thinks to herself, this person could be a murderer. This person could have killed someone.
Right.
So Lisa decides that she's going to steal Taylor away from the guys, and they're going to go do some clothes shopping. Chapters 2 and 3 are basically the two of them doing just that, shopping for clothes. Lisa's using it as an opportunity, a bonding opportunity, and Taylor's dealing with it. She seems to enjoy it, but she does keep her feelings pretty close to her chest.
Definitely. In spite of that, and I think even though Lisa is intentionally not using her powers on her teammates, Lisa is trying, maybe without the powers, to unravel what might be bothering Taylor, and offers up as evidence that there's something that Taylor dresses in a very drab manner. And that, Lisa originally thought that maybe Taylor's dad was abusing her.
Right.
But has since decided that's not it. And so the topic of the sucky side of Taylor's life versus the non-sucky side, and her trying to keep those apart and not wanting either one to kind of overlap the other.
Yes. What you see here, despite Taylor's efforts to not get too emotionally involved, and perhaps I'm looking at that wrong. It might not be the best way to say it, is you see a budding friendship here. There's no way that Lisa could have this kind of interaction with Rachel because she's not that kind of personality type. But here you have a couple of young ladies bonding over clothes shopping, and I think it's something that they both need.
That's a great point, and I hadn't really considered that from Lisa's perspective. From Taylor's perspective, it's fairly obvious. She was betrayed by a best friend, feels like she has no one to connect with at school, and this is a great interaction for her, even though it's undercover and there's hidden motives. She is feeling drawn and getting closer to the other members of the team. But as you said, Lisa is probably in a very similar boat. As a villain, it's not like she's going to the local female villains club on Wednesdays to play
Right.
bridge. So she probably hasn't had much interaction either. And yeah, Rachel's not a good go-to hangout type friend. So point taken. I think there is a real need from both sides, and they're getting along really well, even though Taylor continues to have these suspicions or worries in the back of her head.
Agreed. And we get to this one particular point where, as you pointed out, the Taylor talking about the sucky and the non-sucky parts of her life, and Lisa intuited that it was something going on at school and offered to help. Taylor opened up to her a little bit about some of the harassment she was facing, and Taylor made it clear that, no, if you do this, I'm gone, I'm out of here. To which Lisa was a little bit hurt because she seemed like she wanted to help her friend.
Yeah, and we've all run into that, where as a friend, we feel we can help a friend in a certain way, and for whatever reason, that friend isn't interested in the help. And so none of us like to see a friend suffering.
Right.
We all have kind of a part of human nature to want to try to help where we can. But I think Lisa gets it. They all have compartmentalized areas of their lives, and she's just kind of figuring that this is part of Taylor's. So
to elicit Taylor's silence on her little hiccup when it came to missing Panacea among the hostages at the bank heist, Lisa offers to pay for Taylor's clothes that she picked out for her. And I thought that was kind of a fun little beat between the two of them. She's, hey, I'll buy these for you. Hey, what do you say you keep quiet and not let the guys know that I messed up on not seeing Panacea there? So that was kind of funny.
It was interesting, and I wasn't sure how to take it. I like your take on it. I was looking at it kind of from the angle of, was this something that Lisa was using as a convenient way to get Taylor to quit protesting about taking the clothes? What was Lisa so focused on that she overlooked Panacea, or was there something else at work? So I don't know. I sometimes go down rabbit holes that aren't even there. Digging myself, I guess. So
good question. Good question. There may or may not be something to that. I can or cannot confirm that.
okay.
So after the ladies finished their shopping, they had earlier, I should back up. The team had, prior to splitting up, decided they were going to eat at Fugly Bob's. So after they split up, went shopping, they came back together and had some food at Fugly Bob's. And everybody needs a Fugly Bob in their town, I think. Wouldn't you say?
Oh, I would heartily agree to that. Yeah, there have been so many good burger or barbecue places I've had over the years, and it's even better if it's near a shopping area.
Oh yeah,
you can just double dip. You get the food out of the way, and you get some fun stuff. So,
and taking a bit of a broader view on this arc in particular, and I'm probably going to say this a lot, but I like the interactions among the characters almost more than I did necessarily the action in this arc. I like the description of the town, Brockton Bay. I think for me, at this point, Brockton Bay almost became a character for me. And the writing of the characters and their interactions, I really began to like this group of kids. You know what I mean?
I can see where you're going with that. I
mean,
agree.
if you avoid if you look past their career choices, as I think Taylor said at one point.
Yeah, and that's always the challenge. And it's a sign, I think, of great writing when, you start rooting for the bad guy, so to speak, where it's like, oh, well, I can see where that would have maybe caused that choice to happen. And maybe this person isn't as bad as I thought. And
yeah,
we're already getting into that. And it again goes to Wildbow's great job of world building, where he keeps adding on seemingly inconsequential details, but it really fleshes things out nicely.
Right, because it's, again, yes, this is a story about superheroes, but the superpowers is not the primary driving force. It's the interaction between the characters, at least for me.
Definitely. Yeah, it's a big shift from the typical Marvel movies or comic books that I read when I was younger, where you don't know any of the stuff that's going on. I can remember one comic that I read that had a lot of neat world building details, if you will, or little side things. I can remember one frame where there was a big battle going on, and in the background there was a sign for a shop or a business, very recognizable as Pep Boys, but the author had changed it to Pup Boys and made the three faces look like different dogs. And there were lots of little things like that where it's like, okay, maybe this is some kind of alternate Earth or something. We don't know what's going on, but I see that as kind of analogous to what Wildbow is doing.
And as the kids are having their meals, Taylor asks, I know it's kind of usual when people with powers get together for people to exchange origin stories. And that kind of kills the mood initially. And as we move into chapter 3, we get a discussion of trigger events. Tell me your impressions of trigger events as a concept.
Well, I think that's kind of a standard trope in superheroes. You have the gamma rays with Dr. Banner, the spider bite with Peter Parker. So this is a little bit more an emotional or a very traumatic event in kind of an emotional sense, I guess, but a similar idea. But yeah, about the worst thing she could have said, they're having a great time and then everything just stops. And it's one of those things where reading about something on the Wikipedia, it makes you think, oh yeah, people talk about this all the time. This is not a big deal. But once somebody they start fleshing out, well, what was going on when you got your powers? And she's like, oh yeah, that would be really, really horrible to talk about.
Yeah. And surprisingly, it's Alec who comes out and is kind of explaining to her initially why this might not be a subject worth discussing. So Taylor looks inwardly a little bit at herself and decides that, is questioning herself, why had I brought this up? Because if everybody was going to share, eventually it was going to be her turn. And it turns out, as she's thinking about this, she feels that perhaps maybe I do want to discuss this. And as she goes through and covers and shares with the rest of the team her trigger event, what led to it, I get kind of the thought that maybe this was kind of a catharsis for her.
That's a great point. I hadn't really thought about it that way, but I think you're spot on. It was, truly horrible event, the way it's described. The way that she's overwhelmed by the signals kind of reminded me of Daredevil, and you get this inrush of all this information that you have no idea where it's coming from or what it's doing or how to keep it out. And I think talking through it probably did relieve a huge burden for her to be able to share that with somebody.
Right, because she hasn't told her dad about this. As far as her father knew, it was just this horrible event that took place, and she, darn near had a psychological break because of the trauma. He doesn't know she has superpowers, and this is her first chance to share with other capes what she went through.
Exactly, and you can understand the dad not thinking it's anything more than the horrible thing that did happen. I was a little guy when I was all the way up into high school, and I got locked in a locker 7th grade or 8th grade. It was partially, I gave somewhat of a consent jokingly, and then it happened, but it was horrible just in an empty locker. I'm telling you. So I can't imagine with all the stuff that was there and all the things she was going through.
Right. One of the more fascinating things also with regards to trigger events was the as they were going into further detail about this, the discussion about second generation capes triggering more easily. And they used Glory Girl as the case in point, where she triggered after taking a hard foul during basketball in gym class. So the second generation capes, the kids of capes, seem to trigger more readily.
That's a good point. I hadn't jotted that down, but I did want to talk about that. Maybe it's something to do with recessive versus non-recessive genes. If you're getting them from both parents, then your body is already somewhat ready for it or attuned to it, or it's not as foreign. And then when something happens, it's an easier flipping of the switch, if you will.
Could very well be. Yeah. And as she's sharing the information with the rest of the squad about the bullying and that event being stuck into the locker, she made them promise that they would not act against her bullies. And this garnered some interesting reactions from Alec in this regard. Was it strange to say that he was showing compassion with her? I know he was a little irritated that she didn't want to seek revenge, but I got the feeling that he was kind of wanting to stick up for her. You think? Is that fair?
I think it's very fair. I got the impression that Alec, given that he's a very slender guy and his power isn't, summoning lightning or something very significant like that, might have gone through a horrible experience. He said, I have no desire to share this a little bit later, his trigger event. And he may have gotten some revenge on people and felt that it was good for him, and is surprised that Taylor is not interested in that.
Before we go too far away from this one subject, so we know that Rachel is a killer. Do you want to posit who you think the other one might be, or do you want to take that guess or hold off?
Well, in a little bit, we'll get into Gru's trigger event, and so that kind of rules him out. Although there could be one of those things where, as a result of what happened, the person died later on, and it's kind of a murder legality type thing, if you will.
Just so I'm clear, are you associating the potential murder as a result of someone triggering, as it happened in Rachel's case. But is that the line you're
Oh,
drawing?
I hadn't thought of it that way, but it could be.
or I always assumed it was, yeah, okay, we have the specifics in Rachel's case where that dog that she had was being abused, and she triggered and it harmed some people. But the other undersider who's guilty of murder, could they have? Are you saying that their trigger ended up causing them to hurt someone, or they harmed someone in their career as a supervillain?
I guess I'm thinking of the former, and I'm thinking it might be Alec, but not necessarily intentionally. That he was thinking he just I wish that person would just go away, and it turned out they were near the subway platform and they fell in front of the train or something.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Interesting. Let's see where that goes. Alec wants them to do something on Taylor's behalf, and she makes it clear that she's not about having any of them seek revenge on her behalf. The only other person who offers to share their story with regards to their trigger event is Brian. And that was a very, very interesting and compelling story that he shared with the team.
Definitely. But I'd like to backtrack for 1 second. I thought the way Taylor reacted compared to the others, especially Alec, really is kind of what sets her apart. We've got a lot of stuff here in this arc, especially, and in others, where you think of either good or evil, but there's a whole spectrum, and you have people, somewhere on that spectrum. And the Undersiders are definitely, a little bit off the middle toward the evil side because they're performing crimes,
right?
But they're nice people in some cases. So they're not inherently evil and always out to get people. But Taylor has this clear, deep down kind of feeling that I'm not going to seek revenge this way. And that to me puts her more than the others definitely on the side of good, and argues toward what we had talked about in one of the other episodes about me thinking Taylor will eventually end up being a cape rather than a villain.
How big of a struggle do you see it being for her to make that move?
Well, I guess I don't think it will be a big struggle. I think though she's started out very naive about the whole thing, which is typical. And then she realizes, well, these are real people involved and they're going to be on this spectrum. And so they're going to be some protectorate folks that are going to be obnoxious. And just because they're trying to do quote unquote good doesn't mean that they're wonderful people. And then there's going to be people on the other side of the spectrum, like the friends that she's developing, and they are nice to get along with, but they're doing illegal stuff. So that's kind of the opposite of good. So I think the big struggle for her is going to be when she departs, how to try to either take the friends with her, get them to switch sides, or, slowly convert them, if you will.
Right. Because you had mentioned in your response to a question that we'd gotten last episode, you see her being a cape long term and maintaining a relationship with Gru, and hopefully pulling him toward the side of good. You still have that feeling?
Yeah, and it was even kind of validated for me a little bit when Brian shared his origin.
Let's talk about that. Let's why don't you tell me what you thought about his trigger event?
Well, it's one of those hero or reluctant hero kind of things where he's not been in the best situation. There have been struggles in his family, but when his little sister calls out for help, he has this innate nature, if you will, that something tips him off that he really needs to step in, and she really needs his help. It's not just her goofing off or being a goofy little sister or whatever. And then when he gets there, he takes care of business and plans on even long-term being a surrogate parent for his little sister. So it again validates that I think Brian has this good streak in him, if you will. Maybe not as wide as Taylor's, but it's there.
There's something,
and
yeah.
I'm hoping that she can fan that flame a little bit, if you will, so that when she switches sides, he's able to either stay connected with her or even come with her. I don't know.
So Brian is sharing this story of his trigger event as the team is making their way back to the loft. Their plan was to go pick up Rachel, grab the money, and then turn all the money over to the boss. And they get there and there's no sign of Rachel. That moves us on into chapters 5 and 6. They decide that they need to get dressed in their costumes. Brian says, "Hey team, the money's not here. Rachel's not here. Let's get dressed and go to the location where the money is." They run into Uber and Leek. These guys are complete clowns.
They are quite funny. I want to backtrack for 1 second about the proposal from Brian that Taylor make costume for him out of the spider silk.
Thank you. I'm sorry I missed that. Please go ahead.
Well, my brain, as you know, tends to go off on these tangents and build these elaborate plans that could go. And I thought, well,
oh yeah,
if Taylor is stuck not wanting to be good or evil because she doesn't want to split up with her friends, she could just go into a side business as a costume designer, and she could just make costumes for both sides and try to, be almost like one of those arms or weapons dealer kind of people. And so I just imagined her with this giant Amazon warehouse filled with Black Widow spiders and these special cages that the spiders knit themselves out of silk, and then cranking out stuff. And
good point. I had not even considered that as a little business venture for her. But yes, I thank you for bringing that up. I did like Brian commissioning Taylor to make her a spider silk costume. Poor Alec, he wasn't having any of it, especially when they talked about setting up the lower portion, the downstairs portion of the loft, which used to be some kind of manufacturing facility. I forget exactly what it was. And she started doing the mental math and saying, "Hey, you know what? If I set up cages here and some workbenches there, all I need." What did she say? Like 10,000 spiders, I think it was.
Right.
And Alec, is nearly losing his mind. It's like, no, I don't want to live here with that many Black Widow spiders. Are you crazy? No way.
Well, and I hadn't really thought of it that way. Again, I was just caught up in the whole, well, why not make it mass production? I mean, 10,000 doesn't sound like enough. This could be Amazon of cape costumes here. And then when Alex pointed that out, I'm like, oh, I probably would not be okay with that either.
No
what
way.
happened if Taylor has her first beer and the spiders get loose?
Yeah.
So yeah, that whole scene was pretty interesting. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I was glad we got a little more Alec this time around. I think you'd mentioned it last podcast. He had been kind of not necessarily a side character, but we hadn't heard much from him, and we got more of this arc, and I was here for it. So Rachel was supposed to be at the loft. She wasn't there. They go to the place where the money was supposed to be stashed. It's not there. And the team's first reaction, Alec's first reaction was, I say we kill her, because their first thought was Rachel had absconded with the cash.
And I think I can see jumping to that conclusion. And Alex seems to be a little bit out for himself, if you will. And so, people who are that way tend to think everyone else is that way too. And Rachel, in Alex's defense, is a pretty loose cannon. And so it's not outside the realm of possibility that she would do that. I thought the description of the storage lockers and their history was interesting.
Yes, it was.
How that had kind of evolved. And then I was also kind of bummed that I didn't recognize the description of the costume for Uber and Leet. I used to play Bomberman all the time. And I didn't pick up on that. So I was kind of bummed.
As a non-video game player, I was completely lost. But yeah, shame on you, man. Shame on you. So Uber and Leet make this dramatic appearance, and yeah, I was laughing initially when they ran into these guys, and they basically were embarrassing them in this confrontation, and you wondered how come these guys aren't in jail. And then things get real serious when Bakuda shows up.
Boy, I guess she seems like she just kind of has that evil aura, even in the first scene where she's introduced there. One thing I did want to touch on was that concept of solid hologram bombs. Wildbow keeps stretching the envelope as far as his imagination on what could be created by the Tinker class, if you will. And I hadn't thought about a solid hologram really, although I guess there have been plenty of examples of those on TV, but for it to be a bomb and then for it to blow up and cause some damage, but not a lot, it was just a really neat concept.
Yeah. Where he gets his inspirations from is beyond me, but it's definitely some good stuff. And didn't Alec give Uber and Leet a ration because one of them pulled out a sword from another game and and gave them a ration for breaking character?
Yeah, he pulled out Link's sword.
There you go.
And I immediately got the image of that because I played the heck out of that game too. And I would have given him crap for that too. That was the other thing I liked was Taylor cluttering up the lens of their little floating camera and it spazzing out, trying to shake the flies off. I thought that was pretty funny.
And there's something we don't want to overlook also. Taylor, the further into this confrontation she gets, the more she laments not having the proper type of or enough bugs nearby for her to draw on. If there's one thing you're going to discover is Wildbow doesn't just throw out mundane ideas and then not return back to them. So you may want to hold on to that fact where she felt she wasn't properly armed when it come to her swarm availability.
Okay. Yeah, I could see that. And I know in the previous arc, she prepared by bringing a van load of bugs with her, but yeah, it's different when you're kind of just something springs up unexpectedly and you reach for what might be around and there's nothing there because people don't live in this area anymore. Bugs typically need some kind of food source, and this is all concrete and people's junk, and if there's anything in the storage lockers. So, okay, I'll keep that in mind.
Bakuda shows up and is saying that she's now the new leader of the ABB, and they have the team cornered. Things are about to go sideways real fast. In the middle of this, we come to a bonus interlude, and we are introduced to Caden, and she is a cape named Purity. She is or was part of Empire 88, and she was involved with the leader of Empire 88, Max, or Kaiser is his cape name. And as you remember, Empire 88 is the racist neo-Nazi superpowered team in the Brockton Bay area. And what we see is interlude from Caden's point of view. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting, the insight into the dynamics. And again, kind of talking about that spectrum of light and dark. It shows another way that a person can be thinking they are improving things, but they can also have skewed notions of what improvement looks like.
Right.
And, Caden is kind of borderline, if you will, but the way Kaiser talks about it is, and what he does is very much, well, the way to make things better is to get rid of all the bad people, and this is my list of all the bad people. And so it again is showing that there's that gradation, and there's going to be, I think, this constant, all these dilemmas coming up where it's like, well, if I do this, it's bad, but it's for the greater good. So should I do it? Should I not do it? Do I feel bad that I did it? Do I feel good that I didn't do it? And I think that's going to be an ongoing theme, and it's great. It's a classic. So looking forward to that.
Kaiser really knows how to manipulate people. That's the primary thing that I get from their interaction. They'd known each other for quite a long time. He lured her into his orbit with his racist group. She broke away, still trying to carry out the mission in her mind of making Brockton Bay safer for her baby girl. And Max manipulates her, makes her an offer, basically, hey, look, come back, rejoin Empire 88 for a year. If we aren't making the kind of changes that you like, then I will step down and become your lieutenant, and you can turn our organization into a feed the poor organization for all I care, but at least rejoin me. And whether as in this case, they happen to be a white supremacist team, or just a corporate guy and his wife, he's manipulating her.
Master manipulator, I think, is a great term for him. He knows which buttons to push, which weaknesses that people have. And even though Caden is very experienced in going through this, she knows what's coming, she still can't escape it, and eventually makes kind of the deal with the devil.
Right.
You got to figure that if Max is willing to make this deal, that he's got an out clause. He's got a back door that'll let him, escape if things don't go the way he wants it to.
So we go on to chapter 7. Now, Bakuda has actually pressed into service a lot of just regular everyday folks in the Asian community, many of whom are there against their will. The Undersiders are scampering around the place where these containers are. They're climbing over them. They're trying to escape. Gru is shrouding the area in darkness, and then they end up getting captured again. It's just a no-win situation. Bakuda uses what essentially was a grenade that generates a black hole.
Yeah, that and again, all of the imagination that Wildbow puts into these various devices. There were just so many interesting variants on the bomb idea, but the black hole one was very significant, and you weren't sure how that was going to work out. Even though Gru had the blanket of darkness up, they heard this sound, like a crack of a whip or something. And so it was strange that any sound would sound that loudly in the cloud. And then, they all start get sucked towards something, and they're all scrambling around, and, focuses on what Taylor's doing, and she can't grab anything. So she uses her knife to dig into a surface, and then feels it pulling out, and is able to grab a door handle as the knife comes loose. But then finally the effect stops, and they all drop to the ground. But the black hole one was very interesting. There was a time stop one, I think. And
right.
But also, the concern over where did all these ABB minions come from, and why are they don't look like soldiers or mercenaries. They look like the guy from around the corner, or my piano teacher. Why are they all here? So
there was one in particular that really stuck with Taylor, and his name was Park Ji-hoo, and Bakuda uses him to make an example of. Turns out she's implanted miniature bombs in the brains of her minions, these people, many of whom, as you said, have been forced into working for her. in addition to just the regular members of the ABB, you've got all these folks who she's pressed into service. She challenges this poor guy who's a high school student, if I'm not mistaken, and tries to convince him to shoot one of the Undersiders in the knee or the arm or anything. Didn't have to kill him. He doesn't. And she activates this bomb that resonates. I think it was a sound device, and resonates him down into his component elements, and just kind of freaks everybody out. That was really bad.
Yeah, that was pretty freaky, even just hearing of it. And it definitely shows how draconian Bakuda can be.
Bloodthirsty.
Yeah, just do whatever it takes. It doesn't matter who it hurts or what she has to do to get done what she wants to get done. It's her directive, and everybody else can just burn. It doesn't really matter. So one thing I thought that, again, Wildbow did a great job of was the description of the sound of Bakuda's laughter.
Oh yeah, because she's wearing that mask.
Right. Yeah. And at first, he describes it as like this creepy rustling of leaves, dead leaves, and they can't, and I can picture, I instantly could think of that sound. And then, Taylor finally realizes that, that's her laughing. She thinks this is hilarious. This guy is a puddle of goo.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't this the first time we've seen a cape kill someone? Because during the lung fight, nobody died, correct?
Yeah, you're right. This is the first time, I think. Yeah.
And it's a pretty brutal death. So yeah. I think Bakuda, I think bloodthirsty, it definitely applies to her. So she spends time trying to intimidate successfully Taylor. She's shaking. And I think there was one point Alec is kind of like, hey, that was kind of cool. And I don't know what he's doing. Taylor thinks he's lost his mind. That was kind of strange, wasn't it?
It was. And I pondered that for quite a bit. And I want to think the best of Alec. I guess I'm just kind of lean that way, but it seemed like, because earlier Bakuda had ordered her minions to shoot Tattletale if she opened her mouth, because Bakuda didn't know what her powers were, but assumed it was some kind of manipulation through speech or the sound of her voice or something. And so it's almost like Alec is trying to make up for that by trying to throw Bakuda off her game. And he has some success with it, but then things get out of hand for him, and it doesn't work.
At one point during their try to escape, Brian Grew elicits Tattletale for information that, hey, do your thing. What can we use against Bakuda? And Tattletale, really the only thing she can come up with is that something in her past is what triggered her. She prides herself on being the most brilliant person there, and Tattletale uses her intuition and thinks basically her ego has a glass jaw. Something caused her to trigger with regards to her self-esteem. And if we can somehow use that against her, she may crumble. She may just freak out.
And Taylor kind of piggybacks on that, remembering what she heard early on, that Bakuda's first criminal activity was, trying to take over her college.
Right.
Trying to blackmail it. So Taylor kind of puts two and two together and thinks maybe the failure happened at school, and that might be the glass jaw, as Tattletale put it.
So as the team's trying to escape, Grew had injured his ankle pretty badly at one point. Tells the team, "Hey, you guys take off. I can't run full speed. I'm going to try to stall her." And he uses his darkness in a first act that I thought was really kind of cool. First time I think he'd done this, where he created a phantom of himself, so to speak, as Bakuda and her minions are chasing the team down in a Jeep. He creates this phantom. They drive through that thing, It freaks Taylor out initially because she thinks Gru's been run over, but it turns out that that wasn't the case.
This whole sequence I thought was really neat. We had, ongoing brainstorming while they're running, and Tattletale being able to provide her insight. And then, Gru first being very kind of self-sacrificial, or, go on without me.
Right.
And then Regent also leaving nothing on the field, using all he can to try to save things. And so the fact that everybody was pitching in kind of to their utmost was really, really cool. They know how desperate the situation is, because Bakuda just keeps pulling out more crazy bombs and stuff. And so,
yeah, she's completely out of her mind. So Regent had initially, during their escape, had used his power on a group of people, and it backfired on him. And so he was down to 50% or whatever you want to say. And in an effort to help Gru, he causes the driver of Bakuda's Jeep to swerve and hit a wall, and that takes him out. Bakuda ends up on the ground. The team thinks that they've got her where they want her. She appears to be out. That's not the case, is it?
No, they were definitely counting their chickens before they hatched there. And it's understandable given how intense this whole sequence has been, but it's one of those things that you learn that, well, and we've talked about martial arts in the past, you oftentimes don't take somebody out with one punch.
Right.
You keep punching until they're down, or they, say, okay, I'm done. I quit. And in this, it's like, oh, she fell down, we're good. And then instead they just let her crank it up another notch.
Yeah. And it was bad. It was bad. Taylor gets shot with some kind of a taser grenade or something like that. It knocks her down. She's hurt really bad. The others are taken out slightly by the effect, less so than Taylor, because she wasn't the one who took the full force of it. It turns out later we find out that the good news is her spider silk costume prevented her from being burned by the blast. Again, Bakuda has them in custody and starts the monologue and is talking all this craziness, inserts a bomb capsule, a distortion capsule in Gru's nose. Things look bad for our heroes, for our capes, till Taylor grabs her knife and slices off some of Bakuda's toes.
Yeah, and we didn't touch on that earlier, but the implication when Bakuda liquefied the guy was that she just did it with her mind, or she may have even explicitly said that she didn't have to do anything. And Tattletale had been able to tell him in the running brainstorming session that she actually had toe rings. Bakuda was using those to trigger the bombs. And so the three other members of the Undersiders are all wrapped up in some kind of glue bomb type thing, and they're all out of it or just immobilized. Bakuda knows that Taylor was the one that took out Lung, and so she has a special treat for her. And as you said, the whole uber villain monologue that Taylor's going to have to watch all of her friends die, that's her punishment.
Right.
And Taylor just keeps trying to use pain to keep herself awake and is struggling to try to figure out what to do. But then finally, as Bakuda's distracted looking and putting the bomb in Gru's nose, Taylor remembers or comes across, feels that she has the knife with her still. And so she's able to swing it and hit something hard. She's not sure what it is. The pain of having to do it kind of causes her to get even more distorted. She's not sure what's happening until she finally is able to focus and realize that there are two toes laying there on the ground with a scrap of pink boot.
Yeah, she had, in this state, she had managed to get her brain to function enough to give her some clues. And she thought, hey, for some reason, and let me lash out and take this stab at her toes. Earlier, Tattletale had mentioned Bakuda was triggering the bombs using toe rings and sighting She had a sight built into her mask, so she wasn't using her brain. That was BS. She was using technology to actually sight and then set off the bombs. So Taylor cuts off the toes and disables her toe ring gizmo. As she's passing out, she shoves the knife over to Gru. That takes us on to chapter 11. Kids, the team escapes, and Taylor is in a doctor's office there with her, trying to get her to recover.
Yeah, you're not really sure. It's kind of told from Taylor's perspective as she's fading in and out of consciousness, and she's picking up bits and pieces. Somehow she's being treated. She doesn't know how she got there. She doesn't know what's going on. She's having trouble even recollecting what happened before, because she got hit with the taser bomb or whatever it was. And so it's a bit disjointed, but you get the sense that somehow they all got out. My thinking was that because of the interlude earlier, that maybe Purity and Kaiser had shown up and distracted things or disrupted things, and that had let them escape. So I wasn't sure. I kept waiting for something to tie that interlude back in.
Right.
But then it turns out, no, that Taylor's strike was enough to incapacitate Bakuda for a while. Then, yeah, she was able to slide the knife close enough to Gru that he was able to get loose.
They take Taylor to, who's really in bad condition. She's got a pretty serious concussion. She's bleeding. In addition to this nerve impulse jamming thing that's causing her all this pain. They take her to a doctor that the boss has recommended, who's discreet apparently and is used to working with parahumans. I'm sure you appreciated this argument between the doctor and Lisa with regards to Lisa's powers telling her what was wrong with Taylor.
Well, yeah, that was kind of the classic doctor/god complex that, unless I have proof, I'm not going to believe anybody else. And, the eventual, I wash my hands of this, it's on you if anything happens, because I don't want to follow that advice, but you're not giving me any choice. So
I did skip over this. During the fight, one of the last things that Taylor did right before she passed out from the pain and everything and having the concussion was she began calling her bugs to her. And in the doctor's office, it turns out the bugs have continued to try to respond and come to her. And one of the reasons they woke her up from her morphine induced haze was they needed to have her send the bugs away. Thoughts about her using her power in her sleep?
Yeah, that was interesting. I had forgotten that as well, but it kind of makes sense. It's the bugs don't have a lot of capacity for thought, but they get this command, if you will, and there's no counter command. So we'll just keep following that command. There's a point I'm supposed to go to, and I'll keep trying to get there. And yeah, apparently they tried to seal the windows and the doors, but somehow bugs still continue to get in. And so they're forced to wake her up to tell them to knock it off.
And we have a little, a kind of neat moment in her haze there. Taylor hears some music coming from outside, and she hears it via a moth.
I had forgotten that. That's right. That's kind of a new level. She had mentioned in earlier battles that it was hard for her to get specifics about the senses of the bugs because they were alien. You can remember from the classic movie The Fly, where it shows the prismatic view a fly would have because the way their eyes composed. And so you can understand where, yeah, a bug's going to hear differently. They're going to feel differently. They're going to much limited range of perception. And so that would be very hard to kind of decode for Taylor, but something's happened and she's able to not only sense the moth, but also take whatever signals it's sending, decrypt them, and then be able to say, oh, this is a song. So yeah, that I had forgotten about that, but that could lead to a whole new level of powers for Taylor.
Think so?
I think so. Yeah. And Wildbow's been kind of hinting at that with all sorts of different scenes where people aren't sure what their limitations are. So
just watch this space kind of thing.
exactly. Yeah. Fly on the wall for sure.
So Brian and Lisa take Taylor home to her dad, and I just love this whole interaction between Brian and Danny and Lisa. This was some really good writing. This is some good interaction from these characters who, in Taylor's mind, should not be interacting at all.
I thought it was really well done too. The part that jumped out at me the most was I kept trying to think of what explanation are Lisa and Brian going to come up with for the injuries? You know, was it a car accident? Did they get mugged? You know, what could it possibly be? But Wildbow was way ahead of us as usual and had realized that once Bakuda had been thwarted, it wasn't like she was just going to go put some band-aids on her foot and have a margarita and try to rethink things. It was, she was going to she'd go up to an 11 now and see if I can blow up the whole city. And she had already had other things in play apparently, but I'm sure she just totally went berserk at that point. And they're able to say, we got caught in one of the blasts and it's been all over the news. So Danny's totally able to believe that.
Yeah. Yeah. As part of the whole thing, her bombing campaign was a distraction in part because she was going to spring Lung from the PRT headquarters. She had their other major henchman, Oni Lee, break him out. And so Lung is free.
And everybody is unhappy about that, yeah. Most of all Taylor. So that was quite a twist there at the end. Yeah, you're kind of getting this feeling that, oh, we're all safe, you know, everything's good. And then it's like, oh no, yeah, that demon we had imprisoned just got out.
Not a good day for Brockton Bay. No, not a good day at all. Bombs are going off all over the city. Yeah, actually, and Tattletale talks about how she thinks the initial wave of bombs had targets with regards to facilities and so forth. The second wave of bombs, she speculated, were in locations that Bakuda thought some of the other criminals, the caped criminals, might be. So, like she was, Lung's going to be restored as the leader of the ABB, and she was doing her part to take out any possible adversaries.
Great point. Yeah, eliminate the competition, and ABB is already expanded with all their unwilling minions, and they'll just fill in the vacuum.
Brian and Lisa tell a drugged up, but feeling a little better, Taylor, what transpired. As we're heading toward the end of the chapter, Taylor and her dad have a really nice exchange. I mean, it's just a look between the two of them. But I want to read this particular part here, and it says, "I saw my dad puttering about the kitchen, probably to keep an eye on me, and our eyes met. I gave a little wave, not moving my arm, just my hand, and smiled. The smile he gave in return was maybe the first truly genuine one I'd seen on his face in a long time." I really like that. I think for me, I appreciated that because I juxtaposed that against the meal they had in the previous arc, where I think I'd mentioned it seemed like the two of them sitting across this broad gulf that they just can't connect. And for this one moment, father and daughter, their eyes meet, and it's a connection and an exchange of smiles, and I really like that.
Excellent point. And I think it also underscores the ambiguity of life. The whole reason that they're there is that Taylor was dressed up in a costume, hanging out with villains, fighting super villains, almost dying, and Danny doesn't know anything about any of that.
No clue at all.
But just the fact that he's able to see her there being cared for by friends is just so warming to his heart that I think even if he did know it, he would be almost willing to overlook it.
Some of my favorite character development early on in this story, and I was really, really here for it. And now we move on to the interlude 4, Brutus. And Andy, in case you didn't know, Brutus is a very, very good boy.
Well, if I didn't know it before, I figured it out in this interlude. It was a really nice little piece where we're seeing it from Brutus's point of view, and Wildbow trying to imagine what goes through a dog's mind, even a super dog or a paradog. I don't know if that's the right term.
Why not? And as I mentioned to you, you know that I got through Worm by listening to the audio books that were done. And
right.
And the guy who had read this particular interlude, I want to give hats off to him because he did a really good job being Brutus, if you will. I just love this thing. So we start off with Brutus and Rachel going for a walk. But before then, actually, we finally find out what happened to Rachel. She had while she was waiting for the team to return from shopping and getting a bite to eat, she had decided to take Angelica for a walk and got recognized by henchmen of Uber and Leet, and she got captured. And that's why she wasn't there when the group got back to the loft, and she got beat up pretty bad.
Good point.
The two of them go for a walk, and she runs into a mom and a daughter. They have a very contentious interaction. I mean, Rachel's point was a correct one. Don't let your child run up to strange dogs. But, you know, Rachel being Rachel, she didn't necessarily handle it in the best way.
Yeah, diplomacy is not her strong point. You know, she wants to make sure the lesson sticks.
Well, I don't think that mother's gonna forget that ever again.
No, yeah, that's going to be indelibly burned into her brain for sure.
And the ultimate goal of Rachel and Brutus in this interlude was to go break up a dog fighting ring, a rather noble goal, even if Rachel uses Rachel tactics to make it happen.
That, as it was told from Brutus's point of view, was very interesting. It starts out with him, as we used to call it with our dog, reading the P mail.
Never heard that one.
Stopping and checking every spot and you know, gaining some kind of information about it. And then they get to this place and he's still able to hear, you know, with his dog hearing and smell with his heightened sense of smell, and it's not good. You know, lots of fear, lots of blood. I don't know if he uses the term death, but there's that implication that there's probably been other dogs dying here or in really bad shape. Yeah. And then, you know, Rachel, as you said, uses the sledgehammer for brain surgery and just wades right in.
Yeah. But I mean, you know, these people clearly deserve it.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I was a little surprised that there wasn't more actual death, to your point earlier, but I get where Rachel probably understands, is from a dog trainer standpoint, that you need to make sure the dog doesn't cross any lines or it might not be controllable anymore.
She ends up getting the dogs that were probably involved in the fighting, ones that were in their cages, throws them into a car and takes off with them. And that was her whole goal, was to break up somehow or other she'd caught wind of this dog fighting operation. And again, she may not be able to interact with people, but dogs are her people. And you mistreat. I think Tattletale had mentioned Rachel would be more comfortable seeing a person kick a toddler in the face than abusing a dog. And so that tells you what she's all about.
Definitely. Yeah. And, you know, it's twisted, but you could see, based on what we know about Rachel, that that's how she got to there. And she is, in her own way, trying to be on the side of good, you know, rescuing the vulnerable and protecting them. So again, it's that spectrum thing, you know, it's not what you'd normally think of as a good act, but there is some good in it.
And so that brings us to the end of the arc. What are your overall impressions for this arc?
I really liked it, but he really took us on an emotional roller coaster. The beginning of it with them shopping and just kind of interacting, I thought this was going to be more of a like a Friends episode kind of thing where we're
Sure.
just hanging out and, continuing to build out the space. I, again, went off on my flights of fancy with the whole costume designing section and thought that might continue and expand. And then next thing I know, things go totally sideways and there's these very intense battle scenes and kind of edge of your seat thinking this could lead in a whole new direction. People could be out of the picture permanently or any minute. And then we end up, drinking hot chocolate with marshmallows in it by the fireplace. And and then for good measure, we go back to a dog fight. And so it was just kind of like, whoa, all right, let me off the ride. I need a break. But I loved it.
And let me tell you, this is not the most intense arc we're going to come across in this story. So,
all right. Well, I'll just make sure I have less caffeine when I read the next one then.
And now it's time for Andy to announce his choice for key character of the arc. Whether hero or villain, cape or civilian, Andy will identify the characters that stood out to him, whether for good or ill. Andy, do you have a selection for this episode?
I do, but this was a tough one. During the desperate parts of the fight scene, everybody kind of went above and beyond. And it was, just one desperate act after another. Gru had his moments. Regent had his moments. Tattletale had some moments. And I couldn't single out one thing. And as I thought about it, I thought, well, why couldn't it be a thing rather than a person?
Oh.
And what jumped to my mind was Taylor's knife. This was something that she had been kind of reluctant. She had wanted to have a weapon or something to protect herself, but not a gun. And so they had hooked her up with the baton and the knife. And twice in this arc, it played a huge role. Once with the black hole bomb, where it was the thing that kept her from getting sucked whoever knows where and being out of the picture. And then when she disabled Bakuda, when everybody was unable to do anything, they were all glued to the floor. She was able to cut off a couple toes, and which, led to them being able to escape. So the award this time goes to Taylor's knife.
Hey, well, why not? It was there and performed above and beyond the Call of Duty. So we'll give Taylor's knife the key character, inanimate as it may be, the key character of the arc. And with that, folks, I guess we're done for this podcast and we'll be signing off. We want to say thanks again for joining us in this episode. We really appreciate it. We hope that you like and enjoy what we're doing here. And we hope to catch you in our next podcast. Take care.
Thanks so much. And I hope you're all enjoying this as much as we are enjoying making it. Until next time, bye-bye. Thanks for joining us in this podcast. We hope you'll like, comment, and subscribe. If not, thanks for stopping by anyway, and we'll hope you'll return. Music is by the band YYNOT from their self-titled debut CD. You can find more in the link down below. Catch you later.